1, 2, 3, breathe in. Hold and release. All right. Come back to the space at your own pace. All right, so we're here today to talk about moving from trauma-informed care to a healing-centered approach. And I think the best way to start with that conversation is to really ask ourselves, what is trauma-informed care? What is trauma? I think this is a term we hear all the time. We hear it used often. It's a term that comes out of medicine in terms of blunt force trauma or trauma to the body. We hear this term used all the time, but we don't often know what trauma-informed care actually means. The first thing I wanted to say about trauma is that there's a couple different kinds of trauma. All trauma is like all the emotions felt from trauma could be said to be the same, but all trauma is not the same. There's trauma with the big T, which is attack, abuse, life-threatening accidents, natural disasters, things like that. And then there's trauma with the little t, which can be breaks from belonging, which are periods in your life where something happens in which there's a shift and you feel like there's a break from where you once felt comfortable or safe. Divorce, major betrayal, accidents that are not life-threatening but are life-altering. They change the way you see the world, or they change the construction of your family or something. But there's two kinds of trauma. Trauma has a huge effect on our nervous systems. And this is something that's really important to remember. Like the energetic vibrations and our senses are processed through our nervous system. And so these are connected and kind of wired to our organs, our feelings, our thought. So as these vibrations change and shift, all of these things are actually changed. Your organs actually go through a change. Your feelings and your thoughts actually go through a change. And from this, we develop survival strategies. And these survival strategies are hardwired to our pathways, to our brain. So you figure these survival strategies are necessary at that particular point when you have them, at the moment in which you are experiencing the traumatic event. But when they become hardwired, they stay. So they may not be beneficial to where you are right now, but something can happen that triggers those experiences again. And once again, you're right back in that place. And so by being hardwired, it's very difficult to change them. Oftentimes in trauma, in conversations around trauma and in the early development and study of it, it was felt that it had to do with how you thought about things. But recent studies and better understandings of the brain and neuropsychology and neurology help us to understand that trauma is actually physiologically based. It's actually in your body. So these responses that you have that are triggered, perhaps you were yelled at as a child, and when you hear somebody yell, you feel triggered. That's in your body, not necessarily in your thoughts, it's in your body. Freud said people are suffering from memories before we knew much about trauma. These are things that are hardwired into you. So there are factors that affect whether or not we're triggered in terms of our trauma and our trauma responses. The first thing is our energy. So if you're feeling exhausted, or if you're in a reactionary state, you're more vulnerable to being activated. So I noticed with myself that there's a way that when I'm late and pressed for time, I have an actual trauma response from that. And I'm not really sure why that happens. I'm in the process of figuring that out. But there's a way that I get very, very anxious and very, very nervous because I'm going to be late. Our expectations when our students are not performing like the things they're supposed to do, or our mate is not performing the way they're supposed to do, or whatever is going on in our expectations is not happening, this can make us susceptible. Survival, which a lot of us may be dealing with right now. 40 million people have applied for unemployment, so there are many people out here who are considering and thinking about their survival and their sustainability. This can make us more susceptible to our trauma responses. And then life stresses, when we're feeling more sensitive or in vulnerable states. So when you're sad or when you are grieving, things of that nature can make you more vulnerable to your trauma responses. So what is trauma-informed care? So trauma-informed care, as we understand it now, kind of evolved out of different terminologies that were used at earlier dates. So in the 90s, it was called resiliency. So anybody who was in education in the 90s know there was a lot of conversation around resiliency, young people being resilient. Excuse me. Later in the 2000s, it became youth development. Youth development became the term when we realized that it wasn't just about young people being resilient, that they were created more comprehensively develop young people, develop their skills and their ability to survive and thrive through youth development. This eventually evolved to trauma-informed care, which is where we are today. But there's some problems with trauma-informed care. One of my mentors and sort of an inspiration is Dr. Sean Jenwright. You will see his name cited under a lot of the slides. And he talks about when he was doing his work at a youth center in California, that he was sitting in a circle with young men, and at one point a young man said, "But I'm more than just my trauma." Because what happens a lot of times when we get these sort of buzzwords, or get these sort of ideas around, oh, now it's about trauma-informed care, it gets applied evenly across the board as a blanket response to everyone. And so what this young person was saying is that I'm more than my trauma. It's not just what's happened to me. I'm more than just that. So what do we do to sort of move from just simply looking at populations and at people as about their trauma to looking at what the possibilities are, what the future holds? One of the questions that I believe that we sent out was asked you, when you hear the term trauma-informed care, who do you think of? Who comes to mind when you think of trauma-informed care? Because often, and I asked that question and wanted to ask that question because often in communities of color, this idea that communities of colors are living in trauma day to day, this gets applied to all young people coming out of communities of color, that they're living with this trauma, that their lives are traumatized. And that poverty in and of itself is traumatizing. And this isn't necessarily true. I'm not saying it isn't true, but it is necessarily true to be a blanket statement.
What kind of shit that should be required?
Trauma-informed care, though correct in emphasizing trauma, it has a tendency, trauma is like an important factor in the health and well-being. It has a tendency to really focus on the individual. So you and taking care of you and your individual trauma, as in PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. So looking at the individual. And it tends to ignore that trauma is actually experienced collectively, that we experience it in collection, in community with our trauma. Additionally, ignores that trauma is often the result of environment. So social toxins, like a social toxin, for example, if you were sitting in your room right now and your room had lead paint on the walls and asbestos in the ceiling, you would be breathing in those toxins. Well, there are social toxins that are in the environment as well. Poverty can be a social toxin. Alcoholism can be a social toxin. Drug addiction can be a social toxin. So these things also play a role in the environment and create what's called PTSD, or persistent trauma stress environment, which affects families, communities, cities, and nations. So one of the important things that's realized as we move forward in trauma, that it's not just about the individual. So there are social determinants that impact our trauma experiences. Some of those social determinants are like racial bias, class, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, immigrant status. In the systemic, we're talking about public policy, practice, and government, the way in which laws are enacted and enforced. Policing falls under that. Business and corporations. This has to do with the decisions that are made around what we call marginalized communities in terms of where does the incinerator go, or where does the new freeway entrance go, and what does that do in terms of causing trauma in the community, or the closing of plants. Schools and education, and then nonprofits. And in the environmental, there's the physical environment, which we talked about before, social toxins, which we just mentioned, economic disparity, and then like a lack of services and resources. All of these things play a role in creating a traumatic experience for people in their communities. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to take this route is because coming into our classrooms and into our schools in those book bags are more than just books and pens and pencils. There are all kinds of experiences that are happening in the household, experiences that are happening in the community, things that people are aware of. Even if you live on a block, like I'm from Detroit, Michigan originally. I live in the People's Republic of Brooklyn today, but I'm from Detroit, Michigan. And like walking down the street and having every other house on your street burned out or shut down, or those kind of things. Like, how does that affect your sense of your environment, your sense of place, and your sense of belonging and safety? So social determinants play a big role. The last and most important, I think, issue with trauma-informed care is it often focuses on coping, addressing, and mitigating, and not healing. So we know that you're having a traumatic response. We need to do something about that. So how can you cope with that? How can we address that? How can we mitigate the circumstances instead of really focusing on healing, which is all about aspirations, hopes, and the future? Which brings us to healing-centered engagement. I told Kathy that I was going to say for sure in the beginning, which I forgot to say, that this is a area of study in which there are several books and several articles and lots of things. This is probably about 2 hours worth of content put into 10 minutes. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of give you an overall, kind of an overview of what it means to sort of move from looking at the trauma, because it's going to be coming into your classroom. You're going to be having students who are coming into your classroom or your Zoom space who lost their grandmother, who suddenly lost their aunt, whose teacher is not coming back next year because she passed away. Like, there's a way in which there's a collective trauma going on in our communities that's going to come into the classroom. So how can we engage that and work with that and move that is part of what this is about. So healing-centered approach, according to Dr. Sean Jenwright, is African-centered in its nature, it's indigenous-centered, and it's human-centered. When I get vulnerable and human, that's healing-centered. So the reason that I mentioned the part about it being African-centered and indigenous-centered is because it comes from cultures where community and the collective actually come first. This idea that I am we. If I'm doing well, then if you're doing well, then I'm doing well. But if I'm doing well by myself and the rest of the community is not, then we're not doing well. So this idea of the collective and the community. Healing-centered engagement is an approach that looks at the individual as part of the collective, part of the community, and aligns institutions with strategies and practices that address the harm and restore well-being. It engages the community in developing solutions, determining a path forward together. So what's really important about healing-centered engagement when you bring it into your workspace or into your work is that it's not something that you're going to create for young people to come and be a part of. It's something that you want to create with them. There's with any kind of experience with young people, there are certain things that are going to be within your grasp and within your control, but you want to engage the community and what the community needs to move forward. So healing-centered engagement happens on the individual level, it happens on the interpersonal level in relationship, and it happens on the institutional level. Some of the principles of healing-centered engagement are culture, which are your identity and your identity markers, agency, which is voice and decision-making, relationships, again, community and building relationships, meaning, remember we are meaning-making machines, so meaning is very important. What may mean something for me and what may mean something to you is very different, so engaging around the different meanings that are in the space and what it means to make any decision is very important. And then aspirations, hopes, imagination, a vision of the future. I was recently in a workshop where the facilitator was talking about a young boy named Noam who went to school right down the street from the World Trade Center. And so he was going to school the morning that the airplanes hit the World Trade Center. So just as he was getting ready to go into school, the first airplane hit. So of course, all the children were rushed downstairs and back to their parents, and Noam was whisked off to safety. Later on, like that evening, he was doing a drawing, and he was doing a drawing of the buildings and what had happened. He had the buildings on fire, and people actually jumping from the buildings. And at the bottom, he had this little black hole, like a black hole at the bottom, drawn in. So the facilitator said that he asked him, well, what is this little black hole? And he said, it's a trampoline. So the next time that something like this happens, people can actually save themselves. His ability to do that was because of the fact that Noam was well-loved in a loving household. His parents' reaction was not one that was traumatized themselves, it was calm. So he was able to imagine something beyond the trauma that he had just seen. So it's really important that aspiration, hopes, and imagination is really important in engaging when trauma has happened. So as our young people come into our classrooms, whatever age they may be, along with the questions, along with holding space for how you feel and what's going on, it's also very important to hold space for what's next. What can we build moving forward? So that went remarkably fast. So we're already at breakout sessions. So here are some breakout questions that we have for today. I'm going to read them off right quick, but I want you to know that you're not required to like answer all of these questions. You can choose the one that best works for you. The questions at the bottom are the ones I believe we sent out ahead of time, so you can engage in one of those. But the questions that I'm offering in this moment are, what would an approach to healing center look like for you? What would an approach that centers healing look like for you in your work? Or what do we need to look at, discuss, and reimagine to implement healing-centered approach in our work? What practices might we have to let go of? Because oftentimes in education, there's new initiative after new initiative after new initiative, and no additional time or no additional money. So you're gonna, in order to really get into a new practice, you have to let some practices go, particularly if they're not working. So we're gonna move into breakout sessions in this moment, which I think is Marissa, gonna move us into breakout sessions. And then when we come back, I have a little bit more to share with you around some strategies and some ways to begin to create a healing centered space in your community.
Thanks, Jay Christopher. Yes, I'm gonna move everybody into breakout rooms in just a moment. There's about 4 to 5 people per room. We'll do it for a little less than 30 minutes, so we have some time to debrief at the end. And when you enter the breakout rooms, please take a minute to a link to the shared document. It's available in the chat if you don't have it available from when we sent it out earlier. And when you arrive in the breakout rooms, please take a moment to populate the document with your name, your email address, and your location. And then you can choose together a scribe and someone to also moderate so that we can keep track of our time. And we'll be spending about 5 minutes per person sharing on these breakout prompts that Jay Christopher has created. And if anybody has any difficulty in the breakout rooms, please do pop back into the main room where I'll be to help assist you. And there is at least one person in each breakout room, I believe, that has experienced one of our centering conversations before. So they might be able to also help know how these have worked in the past. And then about a minute before the breakout rooms are done, we will invite you back. And Jay Christopher is going to be popping in to your breakout sessions throughout our 30 minutes together. So we'll see you all on the other side. And I'm going to open the rooms. If you're still here in the room, check your screen somewhere that shows where there should be a prompt that asks you to join into a breakout room. Let's see here. I see a couple people left. And those of you that are unable to join the breakout room, you can message me and let me know, and I'll leave you here just to listen in. Welcome back. Hello
What a great
again.
discussion.
Have to do them the same way.
And that can be a little freeing. Like, I don't have to do graduation like this again, or don't have to start the year the way I normally started. It's opening us up to a few more possibilities.
Welcome back, everybody.
We're back, Sarah, from our small group with the whole group.
Thank you. I can't see.
Welcome back, everyone. Sorry to have to cut you off. So you've had some time to discuss the questions that were shared from Jay Christopher, and we're actually going to do the reverse today of what we have been doing in our past centering conversations. Usually we will have people share out their reflections from the breakout rooms, but this time we had the privilege of having Jay Christopher inside our breakout rooms. And so we're going to allow him to share some reflections, having been able to get a snippet of what everyone was discussing. I also have the privilege of watching the shared document unfold each time. And I noticed a lot of nodding heads when he was sharing his information, and you will find yourself nodding your head a lot and agreeing with a lot of the things that are happening on that shared document. So please, if you have the opportunity, take some time to read through it at some time after this call, and you'll find some other great resources there on building community. I would say that was one of the huge words and thoughts. Well, building wellness into our communities, that was the big theme. And so Jay Christopher, we'd love to hear what it was like to kind of cycle through everyone's conversations.
Well, it was a little bit creepy because I've never been moved around like that. So I was popping in and popping out, not saying anything. Felt a little creepy. But I have a question. I was wondering if you could just show me by like a raise of hand. How many people on this call are playing an instrument or are an artist of some kind? All right, so if you play an instrument, then you know that the first note that you ever hit is always going to be ugly. All right, the second and third notes are going to be ugly too, but eventually you will get to music. So I'm going to jump a little bit ahead in the presentation and say that, you know, this healing-centered work is actually cathedral building. If you know anything about cathedrals, they take about 100 years to about 300 years to complete. So the first person that lays the first stone of a cathedral knows that they will never see that cathedral when it's finished. They will never walk through the halls of that cathedral. So I don't want anyone to think that healing-centered work is about like coming in with a brand new kind of Band-Aid that's better than the last Band-Aid that didn't work. You're actually starting into a practice. And as you move through it and try different things, it will become more natural, it will become more second nature, and it will begin to flourish. But the important thing is take the first step. Trauma has a lot to do with how our limbic systems function. And the hardest thing about COVID-19 is that we can't give each other a hug. The woman next door to me lost her partner. I can hear her crying every single day. I can hear her playing music every single day. And when I see her, when she comes to my door, I can't give her a hug. And a hug does so much to help heal us, to help heal us. So I don't want anybody to think that there's like, you know, a lot of this healing-centered approach stuff, you're already doing it. You're just doing it with the one or two people you love that you feel like you want to do it with. The question is, how do you begin to approach healing and create a culture of healing within your classroom, within the community that you're in which we embrace and listen from the heart or do whatever we need to do to begin our limbic systems to begin to repair those traumatic synapses from firing or stop them from firing. What I wanted to do, I know that you all usually share, but I wanted to share a couple of strategies moving forward. So I'm going to share my screen right quick. Again. All right. All right. So here's some steps to creating a healing-centered engagement. First of all, if you notice at the bottom of this pyramid, it starts with your own individual healing practices. And I don't quite frankly care what those are. I'm a painter, so for me, taking a brush to the canvas and spending hours with my painting is very meditative. For some, it is meditative. For some, it's yoga. But your own healing practices. I also practice an traditional African religion known as Ifa. So I spend time with my ancestors. But it begins with your individual healing practices because it's really hard to build something out without that you do not possess within. Next thing is to establish a cohort of practitioners. So as you begin to get into your own healing practices and get into your own groove, you want to get with other folks who are getting into their own practices. And this is also in your educational community as well. You don't want to come into your school and be this one person saying, let's do healing-centered engagement in my classroom only, because then when they go to every other classroom, it'll be the same kind of approach. So you want to establish a cohort of practitioners. You want to build interpersonal relationships. You always want to build interpersonal relationships. You want to inventory the policies and practices. So this is on the institutional level. So begin to look at what are the policies and practices. And that can also be like the setting of the school, like how are classrooms set up? How does hall passing take place? All these different things. I understand we're in the Zoom space right now, so that may not be the biggest concern. But what are the policies and practices? You want to inventory those. Then you want to pilot and test some institutional practices. Again, it's much more effective when the school or the grade takes on these practices and it's happening in every single room, so it's reinforced in the same way, whether it's mindfulness or whatever that practice is. And then of course you want to evaluate what's happening towards healing. A lot of times in the educational environment, at least I know from working with public schools, that what we tend to hold metrics around are things like violence, absenteeism, like all the bad things. And then we consider a great culture when those things aren't happening. So when there's not fighting happening, when there's not violence happening, when there's nobody skipping classes, when people are doing the things they're supposed to do, then that's a great culture. We don't measure belonging. We don't measure happiness. We don't measure connection. We don't measure a lot of these things. So when you begin to evaluate your progress towards healing, you don't want to measure, you want to have a different set of metrics that you're measuring to see if this is actually working. Some things to consider in creating a healing engagement. First of all, the environment. There's a school in Compton, California that I'm familiar with. I can't remember the name of this school, but they created this thing called the school spa, where they realized that they had they had a greater need in their school for like really mental health services and support for young people than they had counselors, or than they had human resources. So they created something called the school spa. And in their school spa, they paid attention to things like the seating, the lighting, different aromas, like having lavender and different things going, different aromas in the classroom, sound, an emphasis on quiet and on presence, and then art and images, words and phrases, all those kind of things. So you want to think about the environment that you're creating this healing-centered engagement in. In the Zoom space, maybe the next time you get on the call with your students, you might want to have some music playing, some chilled out music. We might want to pay attention to what's in your background. What do you have in terms of your virtual background going on behind you? Like all these kinds of things. Second thing you might want to consider is playing, imagining, building, and creating. As I was floating around in the groups, I heard a lot about asking students how they feel and how students are getting tired of being asked how they feel or how are you doing, and like trying to get students to talk to us. But I think I worked in youth development for a number of years, and I know that, and I worked with some communities that had a lot of things going on. But when you ask a young person how they're doing, the question is almost always, I'm okay. How you doing? I'm good. I'm good. Two people can be in a car accident. One can respond by jumping out the car immediately and trying to run to safety. The other can be frozen because of how trauma works in the body. So a student who's shut down and doesn't say much sometimes gets ignored. And a student who talks all the time, we pay a lot of attention to. So I wouldn't rely so much on the word, on spoken word, and on young people answering your questions. So what about hands-on projects? What about things where young people are building stuff? What about the tower challenge, where you have young people sit even in the Zoom space and build a tower as tall as they can out of things they can find around their house, building towards the future. And also teaching play. And this is for the adults as well, because we forget how to play as adults. And I'm a grown adult. I haven't forgotten how to play because I'm a silly adult. But like we forget how to play because life gets so serious. But teaching play and allowing for play. These are also ways of really engaging in a healing environment. It doesn't have to be necessarily talk therapy because every young person or every adult doesn't respond to talk therapy. In the Zoom space, care calls. I think in New York, most teachers that I know are doing care calls anyway, if they can actually get in touch with the young people. What I did hear in some of the groups and something that is going on in New York is a lot of teachers have lost track of their students because they're not able to track them down through the Zoom calls. They're not on the calls. They're not on the meetings. But care calls are very important. Just check it in to see how folks are doing, not just the young person, but the parents as well, the whole family. Expand your Zoom calls beyond work. Play together on the Zoom call. Play a game together. Do some things together on the Zoom call so that it's not just about, you know, finding out how folks are doing and also just the work, but like having some fun. Sending out care packages. When I say care packages, I mean, first of all, let me just acknowledge budget concerns and budget restraints. I do understand that. But like sending out tangible items that the whole group or your whole class can have so they all can have the same thing, be touching and holding the same thing that represents the collective spirit or the group or our community. Also shared lunch, ordering food. If you have the budget to do that, having lunch together where everybody's eating at the same time or preparing food together. But somehow where you're sharing things more than just the work and having young people and adults have an opportunity to just talk about what feels good, what's beautiful, what they're feeling good about today, what they're feeling possibility around today, because it can be very hard to ignore what's going on in the world and to escape it. Again, healing centered work is cathedral thinking. And this was said by Dr. Sean Jenwright, so I want to make sure that everybody knows that I didn't make that up. I thought it was amazing when I heard it. But I do know how cathedrals are created. And the whole point is that we're planting seeds as we always are as educators. You don't know when those seeds are going to come up. I'm about 54 years old, or not about 54, I'm 54 years old right now. I run into students all the time, 28, 29, 30 years old, that remember something that I said to them back in high school. I can't remember this kid for anything, but they remember me. Cathedral building. So whatever we're doing in terms of instilling practices of mindfulness and healing in our classrooms and our communities, we're building a cathedral, and we won't necessarily see that to its end, but we're investing in the future. And there is a future. All right, so to end my little part here, I want to give some special thanks to, again, Dr. Sean Jenwright. Please check him out. He's my inspiration and leadership for his loving approach. Also, some special thanks to Marissa and Donna. Marissa for helping me with the tech stuff, and Donna just for being Donna, and the whole ECSL group and CBK Associates. Here's a couple of resources for you. I understand you're going to get this PowerPoint, so you'll know this. So this is the future of healing, shifting from trauma-informed care, the healing center engagement. It's Dr. Sean Jenwright's article. And then also I recommend the book by Bessel van Dirkhoff, MD, called The Body Keeps the Score. It's about how trauma works in the brain, the mind, and the body and towards healing. And then last but not least, as a resource, Kathy mentioned it in one of the breakout groups, Documentar. Documentar is a platform where young people can post visual arts, photography, all kinds of creative things that they're thinking about and working with today, and a way of sort of, again, working towards healing through the arts, through arts and creativity. So I encourage you to engage in Documentar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. We're gonna leave the Zoom room open for a while in case there's any Q&A or general chatting that we wanna do. But those of you that need to go, you're more than welcome to. This has been recorded so that you'll be able to share it out with others and reflect on the concepts that way, as well as using the shared document that we created today. And thanks so much for joining us.
I'd like a huge thank you for Chris. This has been really enlightening and amazing. And a word to those who joined us today, our next conversation will be June 12th. So we hope you'll come back for that. I have a feeling we'll be moving on from some of the ideas. The seeds we planted, we'll add another buttress on our cathedral on the 12th and keep it growing. So namaste and thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for hosting. Thank you so much.
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Kathy, you're still muted. I think you wanted to say a few words.
My computer's frozen, folks.
Oh,
I'm going to stop sharing your screen.
great. That was
Great.
what I was going to suggest.
Journal that you took with you that you feel makes a difference in your life or in your work. Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is everybody, if you could open the chat room just for a moment, just go to chat. And I'm going to take the question Donna said and just reframe it slightly. I know there were so many points that I'm going to take with me. Is there a specific idea or thought that you want to even think about more, that you're going to carry with you? Take a moment and put it in the chat. Don't send it yet, but take a moment to put your thought, something that you want to take with you, something you want to keep with you, to reflect upon again, or to share with someone. What's a key thought you want to take with you? If you put it in the chat room, then in a moment after we've done that, I'm going to have us all send it together. So take a moment to put a response to today, a reflection, a thought into the chat room, and then I'm going to count down. I'll give you another moment. And then I'm going to count down in just a moment. 3, 2, 1. And then I'm going to do it again because I forgot to put my thing. 3, 2, 1. Everybody send now. I see cathedral. That's what I wrote. Establishing a cohort. Having students get creative and express themselves. A little push for documentar there. Aspirations. Lovely. So we're a small enough group. Everyone should have their mic on. Is there anything else? Oh, online reflection journals. Yeah. I think what I've seen, even just what we're doing with documentar, is that some students went to draw. There's one student in documentar today who drew a drawing based on an Edward Hopper painting that showed where he was. I was like, excuse me, you know, Edward Hopper. I mean, that. Another student wrote this poem that just gripped me. Every student had a different way of expressing themselves. So I think this, somewhere between play and creativity, giving young people time and a voice to express themselves, is so vital right now. I think it's true for all of us to model that and experience that, and then also for youth. Any other thoughts or questions? Or Chris came back.
Yeah, welcome back, Chris. Just related to that, just the fact that gardening and sourdough bread making is taking such an uptick, it's because it just does something in the brain, you know, just whatever that is for you. I can't wait to see coming out of this what musicians and artists and people that create are going to have to share with us, or are starting to share with us, just because it's been such an interesting headspace, different than ever before. So.
Chris, what are you seeing within your artistic communities that people are? I was talking with an author last night, and he said he's having trouble focusing. So he hasn't been able to find the story he needs to tell right now. So are you hearing from different artists a different kind of experience they're going through right now?
It's a little bit of the same thing. I know that's what it is for me. There is, like I said in the beginning, this is while this is going on, there's also this trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. So every day that you get up, I mean, it's getting to be that every other day there is a piece of police brutality on TV or something that's happened. So a lot of my friends are trying to figure out how to respond to what the response should be. Should they be in the streets? Should they be in their studios? So I think a lot of us are just sort of in pause, trying to figure out what the response is. What does community need? I can tell you this much: for most of my friends who are artists, we're pretty clear that art for art's sake is dead right now. It's like art for the sake of like, what is the role of art in culture? What is the role of art in the times we live in now? Mm-hmm. So, you know, Scooby-Doo on a skateboard on top of a banana in sculpture is like, you know, I'm sorry, for what? Like, so that kind of thing. So I think it's been that.
Any other thoughts or questions that you have? We've got Chris here for a little bit longer. We won't let you go for another few minutes, Chris.
Well, I do want to say this, that this was an overview, and a very quick overview. And my hope is that there'll be an interest in diving in a little deeper into this, and we're able to revisit it in some way, because there's a lot more to it, a lot more to how the brain functions and how the brain functions on trauma. And it's also it's very difficult to think about healing practices when we can't touch.
Yeah.
When we can't be within 6 feet of each other, because so much that, you know how it is when you get a hug from someone, you know, like it can change your whole day. So how do you do that, without the physical touch? So I think there's a lot of work to come.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because last call, that was the massive part of my breakout group conversation, was the lack of touching, especially this Hispanic communities who have these larger families, that they were saying, like, I can't touch my aunts, and the physical, isolationism that's taking effect as adults, as we feel, and the children as well, was a big thing. And we discussed new ways of the concept of what hugs can be, and how you can give virtual hugs that have more substance, and even having your students hug themselves and pictures. I mean, there's just a hug is a huge concept that really can be expanded and reinvented to be manifest in a new way during this process, I think. So I think.
Chris, I agree. There's nothing that can replace that physical contact, but it was interesting. Yeah. This wonderful man I know who's in his 80s was married to a woman they were together for 70 some odd years. And she passed away a year ago, and there was a memorial for her online. And while he can't even be with his family because he's in a residence right now, there were about 80 people who joined together from around the globe. And I know we still miss the physical contact, but there were people together who could not have been there. So I don't even like the word silver lining related to this, because there's really not. That I just don't go there. But there was something unique in that moment that we connected through that I could at least be grateful for. It will never replace being next to someone and hold their hand. It will never. But it was quite amazing what was experienced there. So that was something. Chris, you had another thought, I think, and I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No, I think that's what that makes me think about, is how important it is to understand the differences in trauma response. Because for some people, depending on what your childhood was like, you may be able to be in a Zoom space and say goodbye in a Zoom space and be fine. For someone else who is dealing with abandonment issues or all kinds of things like that, that might be a very difficult space. I mean, one thing that I hope that I was able to relay that I may not have got a chance to get across is that the biggest problem with any of these things, whether it be resiliency or grit or any of these stuff, is that they're applied like one size fits all. Like, okay, and the healing center approach, if there's one thing about it, is that it's not one size fits all, because we all don't have the same, we're not all working from the same set of memories, the same set of experiences. There are some people who don't want to be touched. And so there's no reason, there's nothing in this experience that is like bad for them in terms of touch, because they don't want to be touched. So it's just very different. And so I hope that I was able to get across the fact that you will be, you're in a practice and you'll be planting seeds and figuring out what works. Because for each of you, if I were going to work with each of you in a classroom, each of your experiences, whether they be big T or little t, are going to be different, and each of your needs are going to be different. And the hardest thing to me about one of the most sort of like inauthentic thing to me about what's happening during COVID-19 is this idea that we're all in the same boat. Yeah, but some people got rafts, and some boats got holes in them, and some people got pleasure crafts, and some people got yachts. We all ain't in the same boat. And for many, many communities, the ritual healing, the rituals around grieving and their rituals
Oh,
around
yeah.
sending them to the next, to the ancestors. When you can't do that, then the healing process is interrupted.
Yeah, that's so significant. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very the fact that people can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think it's time to probably wrap up, but this was pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Debbie, thank you, Debbie, for bringing your New York contingent. I think you had a bunch of people here. You had a great turnout.
Great. I'm glad. Thank you.
Do you think it did? I know it did, but what do you think in terms of meeting the needs of those New York teachers?
Oh yeah, I think everything that you did today totally applied to us. No matter where you are, I think it applies for sure. Yeah.
All right, Debbie. So now give me the other feedback, the one you're going to give when you get off the phone, when you talk to your friend. Give me the other feedback. Give me the hard feedback.
No, it was great. I mean, I said in my my room or whatever, my group, that, it makes you think about all the things that we really do need to address. Right now, the school that I work at is so concentrated on how do we get back? Well, but they're not talking right now. I mean, I hope that we're going to be talking, but we're not talking about anything else right now. It's like, how do we get back physically? And that is I think the least of our concerns.
Well, I just want to just say one last thing, and I don't want to invite anybody to do anything that they may find unethical. But I will say this, that in this Zoom space, there's a lot more flexibility around some of these practices than you might have if you were in your brick and mortar building. So if you're in your big brick and mortar building and the principal walks by and sees you all in meditative practice with the lights off, he or she might be alarmed. But in the Zoom space, you actually can, engage some of these. I think you can engage a little bit more freedom, I think, as an educator with your class, if you can convene them to bring some of these, healing practices and mindfulness practices into practice, so to speak. I think there is opportunity there.
So we will have another meeting in 2 weeks. So Debbie, you'll all get the information now because you're part of the community. So hopefully, if you have any thoughts of where we go next, that'll be part of what we discuss as a group, where we go next with our conversations, so that we don't leave these topics behind, but we move forward together. That's real key.
And if you, those of you on the phone here, in addition to the core team, if you have thoughts on where you want us to take the June 12th meeting, the next call, what would be valuable for you to move this forward, just shoot me an email or Kathy or Chris, or, because we really exist by feeding those who we try to support. So with ideas and concepts and tools. So being that you have participated previously, or Maureen has, and just let us know what your takeaway is. I'll be sending out a reflection piece anyway, but let us know what you'd like to see in the next call. And actually also let us know if you'd be interested in calls through summer, because that was something we were debating, whether we'd go further into summer. So let us know that too. That would be helpful.
Well, fall, summer, Chris doesn't know if it matters anymore. So one day to the next, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Can I add two things really quickly?
Sure. Yay, go Maureen.
I know we're going over time, but one, I just want to say, Debbie, you're bringing up such an important point, and so, there's actually an article that a principal here in New Jersey just wrote about all of the things that we may not be thinking about beyond masks and plastic and placement of desks, but the things that young people, especially elementary school students, haven't had to do. They haven't had to line up. They haven't had to go to a bathroom outside their home. They haven't, all these, they're not little things, but all these things that they've really been conditioned and are used to doing in school that will feel very strange to them when schools open back up. So I'm glad that you're bringing that up, and this idea that it's not just, are the buildings safe and ready? folded into, I think, this emotional journey for them is also just reclaiming some routines that make the day easier. And yeah, you know, my kid did not want to put on her pajamas until 2 o'clock today. And you know what? I was all right with that. But there are kids who I know are really just not in these routines anymore. We want to think about that. And then on a lighter note, can I just say that we started the call with Chris's head fan in my household, who is, as much as I love him, not me, was my daughter, who's 6. And if you're looking down at the bottom of my screen, it says Iris Hirsch. That's my mother-in-law.
Oh,
This is a family affair, and I'm sorry that I'm having you all indulge me in this moment, but I'm just so grateful. And Iris, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I'm here.
You're there.
Thank you.
Hi, Iris.
Yay, Iris.
Yeah.
Hi, you know, it's the first I've seen you in ages, and I love looking at you.
Am I lucky or what?
Yeah, very
So I had to share that, Chris. Now you've got 3 generations of major love coming at you from the Connolly Hirsch family.
Oh, that's one. Maureen, that just made my day again.
Isn't it
Anytime
awesome?
Anna pops in. I met Anna, well, I've known Maureen for can't even figure out how many decades. I think it's 2 by now. But Anna used to come to my retreat, our summer retreat, when she was a year old. So she was the youngest. She came for 3 years. So now I still can't believe she's 6. It's going on 24, I think. It's pretty amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. Chris and Marissa and Donna, do you want to stay on just for another minute afterwards, just to wrap up?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Debbie,
much.
we'll be in touch. Thank you.
you.
Thank you all.
Maureen and Iris.
Thank you.
Love you.